Now that the core basics about Node.js and Express.js are set, it's time that we work more on what the user sees, because ultimately we obviously want to build an application which delivers some value to our users, right? Now, thus far, we're always returning static HTML pages, and typically this is not what you do in real applications because you don't just have static HTML code most of the time. Instead, it is pretty common that you have some data managed on your server. Later, we will also do that in a database. That you have some data on your server which you want to dynamically output in the HTML code you send back to your users. An example would be a page with a list of products where these products, of course, are coming from your database, so from your server. Or, for example, we already have a very simple form where people can submit a new product title. Well, right now we're not really doing anything with that. In a real application, you would obviously want to store that and then kind of return it in some other page where you have that list of products I already mentioned. So in this module, we will have a first look at how we can start managing data on a NodeExpress backend. For now, without a database, no worries. There will be a very extensive module about databases in this course, so you will learn how to interact with the database too. But for now, let's just manage data like this. And let's focus on something else here, on rendering dynamic, for now, dummy content in our views. So these HTML pages which we're returning should now become more dynamic and actually contain some content that is dynamically entered into them on the server, so that if we had additional data on the server, we would send back a different HTML page with different content. And for this, we'll use something called a templating engine. And you will learn how such templating engines, there is more than one alternative, and I will present some alternatives in this module. You will learn how they work and how you can use them. So this is what's in this module. And with that, let's dive right into it and let's have a look at how we could manage that data before we then have a look at how we could output it. I'm back in the project and I actually changed the HTML code and the styles a little bit. You find all CSS files and HTML files attached, and just make sure to move the HTML files into the views folder and the CSS files into the CSS folder in the public folder. I did this to, well, change the styling a little bit and also add a little bit of additional markup which we'll use in this module, but no worries, I will walk you through all of that markup. And regarding the styling, it's just a little bit nicer to look at right now, and I also added some styling which we'll need in this module. So with that, I can of course visit the page on localhost 3000, and this is how it looks like right now. Little bit nicer than before in my opinion, but of course you can always style this to your needs. But let's now focus on the data. And right now we don't really work with data in our app, right? In admin.js, for example, we do get that data for a product here in the host route, but we just log that to the console. We're not storing it. We're not working with it. And working with it is kind of hard right now because we have no database where we could store it permanently. But one thing we can, of course, do is we can store it in JavaScript variables and see how that works and if these are then shared across incoming requests from different users. And that, of course, will hold some important learnings because you often, well, don't want to share such data. So let's see how that works before we then later in the course move towards a more permanent database-driven solution. So let's say the incoming product title, which we output here, should be stored in a more permanent place. And in general, I actually want to also add some fields to the form then later so that we can add more for a product than just the title, but step by step. So let's start storing that title which we get here. And just to bring that back to memory, right now we got this field here. And if I submit this, well, then I get this object with the key, title, and the value the user entered. So how can we store this? Well, we could add a variable where we store it in. And the first thing we could try is we could add a variable here in admin.js. Let's say we create a new constant here, which I'll name products, which is an array. And keep in mind, even though it's constant, the array can receive new elements because the array itself is still the same object. We just add or remove elements to it, but that doesn't affect the overall holding array object. So now I got my products here, and I actually want to export my products. So what I'll do down there is I will use a different syntax where I export my routes and export the router here, and exports products and export my products constant. This has one important implication. Since I changed the way I export my routes, I have to go to the app.js file, and with that, in the app.js file where I import my admin routes here, well, actually this is the admin data, and there I want to access the routes object because there will be such a routes object because I'm creating it here. So admin data refers to all the exports, you could say, and there we now have routes and products, and therefore when I do import my routes, I have to import them like this. Of course, admin data is then also something I have to change up here in the import. So now I got this adjusted, and now I got my products exported too. Products is an empty array. Now in here, in router post, let's take the products and push a new element into this array, a new object, let's say, and that object will have a title, which is the title I'm getting, so request body. And keep in mind that also is an object with a title property, so I will extract the title with the dot notation. I could, of course, just push the overall request body, since that will be an object of the exact same structure, but later I want to add more fields here, and therefore I will create a new object here. Also, to make it a bit clearer to see what's happening here. So now we're adding this to products. Now in shop.js, where we output all our products, or where we want to do that at some point, we therefore need to get access to the products. And for this, let's add an import up here. Let's import admin data by requiring admin. So this admin.js file, where we do export its routes, something we're not interested in this file, but also this products array. So now here, let's console log admin data products. So that should be the array. Now save everything, and now let's simply see what we get. If I reload this page, the shop page, I get an empty array, which makes sense because initially this is an empty array, we export it, that makes sense. So let's go to add product now, and let's add a book here, and click add product. We're back to the shop page, and we see something interesting. We see the array with the book inside of it, and that console log statement. Where is this actually coming from? Well, that is coming from the shop.js file here. We can also make this clearer by adding shop.js here and logging the product. So logging two things to make it clearer what is responsible for the output. So shop.js is logging the empty array. And now let's try outputting that book here. And now we got shop.js with the array with the book in it. Now, this is interesting to see. So we can export something, some object or array, a reference type therefore. And if we change that in the other file, it also gives us the update here. So this is interesting. This is one way of sharing data. And to be honest, we'll later use different ways because this has one disadvantage. Here, if I reload shop, we still got that in there. Now, let me open up a totally different browser. I'm in Firefox here, and I also visited localhost 3000. So this is a totally different browser, and this is kind of like a brand new user. It doesn't share any cookies with the other browser, nothing of that kind. It uses the same IP address, but that doesn't matter here. It's a brand new request as if it were made from a different machine. And you will see, I still log this. So this is actually data which is inherent to our Node server as it is running. And therefore it's shared across all users. Sometimes this is what you may want, but very, very rarely, to be honest. Actually, you will probably never implement this. You always want to fetch data for a specific request, and if that happens to be the same data you show for all users that sent this request, this is fine. But sharing this data across requests, across users, is typically something you don't want to do, because if you now edit this with user A, user B will see the updated version, even though you might not want to show that. Maybe it's an edit that normally wouldn't have been saved to the database yet, so you don't want to show that to the other users yet. Maybe it's some personal data. So this is a pattern we can use for now here, and it is fine for practicing what we want to practice here, but later we'll learn about a technique to share data in memory here in the Node app across different requests, but only for one and the same user and not across users, because now we have shared data across requests and across users. And we will later, of course, also learn how to use a database. But for now, let's stick to this approach. Let's use that for some dummy data sharing, and let's see how we can get this data into our view now. I already mentioned at the beginning of this module that for putting dynamic content into our HTML pages, we would use something called templating engines. Templating engines work like this. We got a HTML-ish template, and with that I mean that you typically write some code, some file that contains a lot of HTML, your HTML structure and markup, your style and JavaScript imports. All of that is typically included, but you have some blanks in there, some placeholders. And then you have your Node Express content in your app, like our dummy array, our products array we're currently using. And you got a templating engine which understands a certain syntax for which it scans your HTML-ish template, and where it then replaces placeholders or certain snippets, depending on the engine you're using, with real HTML content. But that content, this HTML content it uses there, is generated on the fly, on the server, by the templating engine, taking that dynamic content into account. So for example, you could output an unordered list with list items for the data you have in your Node Express app with the help of the templating engine. And in the end, the result will be a dynamically on-the-fly generated HTML file, which is then sent back to your users. So the users never see the template, they never see the placeholders. All that happens on the server, they just get a normal HTML page, but it's not hard-coded by you, as it currently is in our project, but instead it's generated on the fly. Now we got a couple of different available templating engines, and actually you got even more options than I show you here. At the end of this module, you'll find some useful links to dive deeper into them and learn about more alternatives. The three options I want to present to you are the three most popular ones. We got EJS, Pug, formerly named Jade, and HandleBars. Now these are three templating engines that use a different syntax and different set of features, different philosophies that you can use to, well, create these templates, inject your dynamic content, and get HTML files out of them. Here's a very brief look at how their syntax looks like, but I will also present all three of them in this module. EJS looks something like this. You write normal HTML markup, but then you also add like this smaller than percentage sign, and then sometimes an equal sign, sometimes not, depending on what you're doing. You will see that in this module. And then the dynamic content you want to output. So if we had some name variable being injected into our template, and you will learn how that injection works. If we got that, then the value of our name variable would be output there, and we would send back an HTML file with a paragraph tags and the value that was stored in the name between them. Pug uses a different syntax. It doesn't use real HTML. It replaces this with a minimized version or a minimal version, and then it also allows you to output dynamic content with this syntax, the hashtag curly brace syntax, for example. HandleBars in turn uses HTML again, but then you have the double curly brace placeholders for the dynamic content. So similar to EJS, actually HandleBars has a bit less features available, you could say, or it follows a different philosophy, but it's closer to EJS. Pug is the outlier here, which also uses a different HTML syntax. So a short summary would be EJS, normal HTML, and then actually you got these placeholders, which allow you to just use plain JavaScript in them, actually. So you can also write if statements, for loops. Pug uses a minimal HTML version and a custom template language, which is extensible, but generally offers only a set of things, of operations you can do. But if statements and lists would be included, iterations would be included. HandleBars uses normal HTML, but also a custom template language with a limited set of features, again, including common things like if statements or lists. So these are 3 popular templating engines. Now let's briefly dive into them, how we install them and how we use them, before we then pick the favorite for this course and stick to that favorite. And again, at the end of this module, you find more resources on all these engines. So back at the project, let me quit the development server, because now I need to install another package. And I will simply install these 3 templating engines so that we can work with them. So let's install them with npm install --save, because all 3 engines are part of our Node code and shipped with the code we deploy on some computer in the end. So let's install them as production dependencies. And there we need to install EJS, that is the package name. And links to the websites of these packages with more documentation can also be found in the last lecture of this module. So EJS. Then we also got Pug. And HandleBars. There is a HandleBars package, but that's actually the wrong one. We need Express-HandleBars here, because this has built-in integration with Express. EJS and Pug already have that built into their core packages, you could say. So let's now hit enter, and now these 3 packages will be downloaded. Now what you can also see here, by the way, is that you can of course install multiple packages at once by simply repeating or by adding all the names after npm install. Now the packages are installed, and we'll not use them all at the same time, but one after another, so that we can have a close look at how they work. And let's start with the most exotic package, Pug. To use that, we have to go to the app.js file, and now we have to let Express.js know, and that is an Express feature, not Node, by the way. Another strong reason why we want to use Express, because with Node, standalone Node, this would be harder. You would have to do all of that manually. Here, we can just tell Express, hey, we get a templating engine that is Express conforming, and that is the case for all 3 we installed, so please use it to render dynamic templates. We do that by going into the app.js, and after we created our Express app here and stored it in the app constant, we can set a global configuration value. Now what is that? App set allows us to set any values globally on our Express application. And this can actually also be keys or configuration items Express doesn't understand. In that case, it just ignores them, but we could actually read them from the app object with app-get. And this would be another way of sharing data across our application, but not really something I'm interested in here. What we can do is we can use a couple of reserved key names here, so configuration items we can set that do lead to Express.js behaving differently. And you see a list of all these items here in this table. Now, most of them don't really matter for us here, but feel free to browse through that. Interesting for us is the view engine and the views key. View engine allows us to tell Express, hey, for any dynamic templates we're trying to render, and there will be a special function for doing that, please use this engine we're registering here. And views allows us to tell Express where to find these dynamic views. So what we can do here is we can app set and set the view here, view engine, to a string Pug. Now, you can't enter anything here. We use Pug here because we installed the Pug templating engine, and this engine actually ships with built-in Express support and auto-registers itself with Express, so to say. So that is why this works. It doesn't work for all engines, but you find more in the links in the last lecture. Here, it does work. Pug is supported out of the box. And with that, we're already set to go. We can set an additional configuration though. We can let Express know where to find our views. However, the default setting here, this is the last column, the default setting for views already is basically our main directory and then the views folder. Still, I'll send it explicitly here to show you how this would work. If you would store your views in another folder, which is not called views, but maybe templates or whatever it is, then you have to set this configuration item here, whoops, this one. And here I will set it to, even though it wouldn't be needed because views is the default. So now we're telling Express that we want to compile dynamic templates with the Pug engine and where to find these templates. The last step, of course, is that we add templates. So let's go to views and let's add a shop.pug file here. So we now have a templating file, and now Pug actually works different to normal HTML. So I can't just copy over this whole HTML code. The good thing is, however, in my IDE here, if I type HTML in the shop.pug file, and then I use this HTML5 template, I get a Pug structure of this. And here we already see the minimal HTML syntax. We got no normal HTML tags, but keep in mind that the Pug templating engine will compile our code to normal HTML in the end. So this here is basically the equivalent to this part here, you could say, except for the style sheet imports. If we wanted to add these, we can do that here too. And thankfully, the IDE helps me here. If I type link and hit tab, I get a Pug conform implementation of this. So here I now can also add my links. The paths, of course, to the CSS files are the same as before. So this is now how we installed Pug and how we added it. Now let's quickly finish this file to look like this file before we then actually have a look at how we can add dynamic content. So let's replicate this link here and import the product CSS file. And now for the body, here I got a header and I got this main area. So let's replicate this in Pug quickly. For this in the body, indentation matters in Pug, that's important. You basically structure your nesting of HTML with indentation levels here. So if head is nested in HTML, then it's indented. And if meta is nested in head, it's also indented. If they're on the same level, they are siblings. So this is how that works. So if we want to add something into body and not next to it, we have to indent here. And then I add my header, which has this main header class. So if I type, again, another useful feature of the IDE, of Visual Studio Code, if I type dot and then the name, like this, and I hit tab, then this looks like it didn't do anything, but actually this is the representation of a div with this class. Now I want a header with this class, so I just write header. So this strange syntax will create a header element with this CSS class. And this is something you have to get used to, and where I strongly recommend diving into the official Pug docs if you want to stick to that. Here, by the way, I will replace the title with my shop. So let's not just add the header, but also nav, unordered list, and so on. For this, in the header, I want to nest something, so let's add an indentation level, and then unordered list dot and the class. And now the same. Whoops, that was the nav, not the unordered list. So that should be a nav item. Now for the unordered list, let's take that class. Let's go in there. It should be nested in the nav. So let's indent unordered list dot class name. And now we got the list items. So here, let's again pick the list item here, or the class on it. Indent, because it's nested in the unordered list, list item dot and then the class. And now, last but not least, I have the anchor tag, which also has the active class, but which then also should have some text content in it, and then also have a link. So let's now go in there, nest this, anchor tag, and the class. If you hit tab, you automatically, this is the attribute notation, so in parentheses after the anchor tag, or after any element, but always without any white space in between, this allows you to add attributes onto the HTML element. So here this should go to just slash. And now for the text content, you can add this next to it. So shop, like this. This will basically place this text between the opening and closing anchor tag. Now this is the setup I want to have here. Of course, we have two list items. We also got add product, which leads to this link. So I have to replicate this. So next to the first list item, I add another one, main header item. And then I have my anchor tag, this one without the active class, just with the link. And there I'll say add product. With this, if I run npm start, we wouldn't see anything. And I am aware of the fact that I didn't add the main content, but let's ignore that for now. With this, however, we wouldn't render this template because we're not telling Express to do so. We're telling Express that it should use this templating engine whenever we try to render a template, but we don't try to do that. So in shop.js, where we do define what should be our response, we have to change the response because right now we're sending the HTML file. Now we want to do something else. We can use response, and then there is a special render method. This is provided by Express.js, and it will use the default templating engine, which is why we had to define it here. It will use that default templating engine and then return that template. And now, since we defined that all views are in the views folder, we also don't have to construct a path to that folder. Instead, we can just say shop. We also don't need shop.pug because we defined pug as the default templating engine, so it will look for .pug files. With this, if we save and we reload the shop page, we see the header. We don't see the main content because we didn't add this, but the rest is working just fine. And if you inspect this or view the page source, you see this is normal HTML code. So it's not our minimal version, which the browser wouldn't be able to read anyways, but it is the HTML code Pug generated for us based on that minimal version. Now, one thing we're not doing here is we're not outputting anything dynamic. But since that is the reason why we added templating engines, let's do that too in the next lecture. We're rendering our shop template, but we're not rendering any dynamic content. That, however, is the whole idea of this module. We got our admin data with the products. So let's actually take these products out of admin data products. And now we want to pass that into our template, inject it into our template so that we can use it in this template file and somehow output it there. To do that, we can simply pass a second argument to the render method. The render method allows us to pass in data that should be added into our view. Here, we can simply pass products. However, not like this, but as a JavaScript object where we map it to a key name, which we then can use in the template to refer to the data we're passing in. And we can pass in prods, simply to avoid naming confusion. You could use products. But then I'll bind my products, so this constant, to the prods key in this object. This is passed into this template, and now in the template, we will just be able to access prods. This is now available. By the way, we can also pass more than one field. We could pass in let's say a doc title, which is shop. And now we can use that too. And let's maybe start with the doc title. So this additional field we're passing in this object. In shop pug, let's say the title here should actually be that doc title. For this, we can use the custom templating syntax Pug gives us. And if you just want to output some text, this is a hashtag followed by 2 curly braces. And between these curly braces, you can put any value you're passing into your view. So any field you have in this object, like doc title. We can use that and simply refer to doc title here. If we now save that and we go back to our page, right now it's still my shop, right? If I now reload, it's shop. And it is shop because this is the title I'm storing in doc title here. And doc title is what we're outputting here. So this flow is important to understand. Now, of course, we can also use that to output our products. For this, next to the header, so on the same indentation level, this is important because it defines the nesting of the HTML. We can add the main element, just as we have it here. And now I don't want to have this h1 paragraph here. Instead, now I want to output my products with this code. So I'll copy it over, even though it is HTML code, but we'll adjust this and transfer it to Pug code. So the div here becomes just .grid. You don't need div, because if you don't have anything, it's assumed to be a div. The article with this class becomes article dot product item. However, important, if you got multiple classes, you need to merge them and simply concatenate them, separated by dots. And never forget the indentation. The article should be inside of this div with this class, so let's indent it one level. Here we got an indented header because it's nested in the article. And this header also has this class here. So let's add it like this. And then in the header, we got a h1 tag. So let's also indent this. And here again, this has a CSS class. Now it also has some text, and you simply separate the text with a white space from the element. And you never need closing tags here. That is handled for you by Pug. So this is really a syntax that is very different to normal HTML, and it's really up to you if you like that or not. I personally don't work too much with it, but if you like it, this can of course allow you to write very lean HTML files. We don't need the closing header tag because again, this is added automatically. So we can move on to the card image, which should be next to the card header. So let's indent, remove that smaller than sign, add this class here without the class keyword, and let's add the image inside of there. We get an image, and again, as before, with the links here, if you have attributes, you wrap them in normal brackets like this, so like the source and also the alt key. You can always, by the way, also use Emmet here. This is the plugin which helps you with auto-creating this. If you type the tag or the class name with a dot at the beginning and hit enter, it will auto-complete that for you and give you the respective Pug representation. And there we saw that we actually need a comma after source right before alt. So now this will create an image nested in this card image. Don't need the closing div tag. Now the card content is also a sibling to the card image. So let's indent this, remove that, and add this dot here. And let's do the same for the h2 tag. Indent it, turn it into a Pug conform setup here. We have some text next to it like this. For now that's static. Later this will become dynamic. And let's also do the same here for the paragraph. Add the class here and have some static text and remove the closing tag. Now we're almost done. Only a couple of elements to go. We got a div. Now this should be also next to card content, so let's indent it. A div, as I mentioned, doesn't have a tag you need to add. You can just have dot something, so dot and the class name. If you have no class, of course, you would write a div, otherwise there is nothing. The button is inside of card actions, and this does have a class again. And then it does have some text inside of it, which we add next to the button element. And all these closing tags can be removed. Now this outputs a grid of product cards, however, only with static content. Now to make this less static, we need to iterate through all the products. And remember that we do pass the products into the view here on the prods key. So to iterate and repeat this article for all the products, we can simply add a special syntax provided by Pug. And you do create such a loop by adding the each keyword, then a value in which you want to store the value for the current iteration, so a single product in our case, and then in, and then the array for which you want to loop. So this would be prods in our case. Again, with prods referring to this key in this object we're passing to our view. So now we're looping through the prods. Let's all indent this into the loop so that we repeat this entire block for each product in this prods array. And now we can use the product variable, which we're creating on the fly here, to output the data, like the title. Here, we could output hashtag, and then again, just product.title. Because remember, a single product we add to this array here is an object with a title key. We do create this here in admin.js. We push a new object with a title key. This is one single product, as we'll have it when we loop through it. So this is what we add here, or what we output here. With all these changes in place, if we now save this and we reload this page, we don't see anything because we have no products yet. But if we add a first book here, we do actually see that here. And we see that the image does not work anymore. Let me quickly add another free to use image. You can, of course, simply Google for any image that you can use as a dummy image here for now. Once you got one, take that source, whichever it is, and simply replace it here. This is only for practice purposes here. So now if we repeat this, this looks much better. By the way, if you only change something in the template, as I just did, you don't need to restart the server, and NodeMon will not do so, because the templates are not part of your server-side code. They are basically just templates which are picked up on the fly anyways, so if you change them for the next request that's coming, they will automatically take that new version already. So with this, we got a basic introduction to Pug. It's strange, very minimal syntax, and how you can output single values like some text, or also loop through some items. Now, of course, we could have the case that we got no products at all. So one common thing you also want to do is you want to ensure that you have a conditional check and render either content A or content B. And we can do that too with Pug. We can add an if statement and check if product's length, so if this array of products is greater than 0. If it is greater than 0, then we'll output this. So let's indent it all into the if statement, because then we do have some products to output. Otherwise, I will go into the same level as grid here, as the if statement, and add an else block, because otherwise I will output a h1 tag where I say no products. With this, now if I restart the server to clear my products array, and I reload this page, I actually get an error because, of course, it's prods here. Remember, we're passing prods as a key, not products. So prods is what I should check here. Now if I reload, I see no products, but if I add one, first book, like this, now we see that instead. So now we got the three most important parts: outputting simple text and so on, outputting a list, and outputting conditional content. This is Pug in a nutshell, and this is how you use templating engines in Express.js in general. Now, feel free, as a practice, to play around with that and also work on that add product HTML page and replace all these items or all the content here with Pug templates. Keep the HTML code around, don't delete these files so that we can easily switch to other templating engines later, but make sure you add Pug templates for the other two pages and that you render them. Also feel free to inject some dynamic code like the page title. In the next lecture, we'll do that together.